On September 11th, airport security was a simple stroll through a metal detector. Then the towers fell, and now airport security has become very time-consuming. But today we've gotten used to it. This video is part 2 about the 9/11 attacks. The first video described what happened the day of the attacks, and if you haven't watched that video yet, then I recommend watching that one first and then coming back to this one afterwards. I'll link to the video in the description box below and somewhere on the screen. This video will focus on how the world changed after 9/11 and how we commemorate it today. And of course, we can't talk 9/11 without mentioning the conspiracy theories. Airport security today doesn't only involve a stroll through a metal detector. Now all your baggage is screened, and you need to remove your jacket and your shoes, and you need to remove all liquid and electronics from your bags that need to be screened separately. Also, now you need to show identification multiple times, where the name on your passport must be identical with the name on your ticket. And in some airports, you even need to register your fingerprint and do a full body screening. As if that wasn't enough, occasionally you'll get a pat down when you've gone through the metal detector. On board the plane, the door to the cockpit has been reinforced and is bulletproof, and it stays locked during the entire flight. This extra security was put in place in the months and years after 9/11 because all 19 hijackers from that day went through security and none of them were stopped. Some of them didn't even have proper identification but were still allowed to board because it was a domestic airplane. And 4 of them set off the metal detectors, but since they only had box cutters and small knives on them, which was allowed at the time, they were allowed to board the plane. Another big change that happened after 9/11 is the ongoing war in Afghanistan. In October 2001, the United States under President George W. Bush began bombing Afghanistan because the Taliban-run government refused to give up Osama bin Laden, who was the suspected terrorist leader of Al-Qaeda. Today, some soldiers with no memory of 9/11, and where for them it's just another event in history, are being deployed to war zones in Afghanistan and Iraq, fighting a 2-decade-old war. There are, of course, many other ways the world changed after 9/11. The Patriot Act was passed, allowing the American government to access people's private emails and phone calls in the name of security and the war on terror. We also lost our innocent worldview. On 9/11, people still calmly continued to work on Manhattan, even though a plane had just crashed into the North Tower and paper and envelopes were fluttering from the sky, because people just assumed that it was an accident. The pilot had a heart attack, there was a problem with the plane or with air traffic control.
I wonder if there are air traffic control problems.
Nobody thought it was anything to fear. Today, a car backfiring is enough to get people running for their lives because they think it's a terrorist attack. You've probably heard the phrase, never forget, which is tied to 9/11. Each year, a service is held where family members and first responders return to Ground Zero with flowers and to remember their loved ones. A bell marks when the towers were struck by the planes and when they collapsed. And the names of the victims are read out loud.
Donald Leroy Adams.
Patrick Adams.
Shannon Lewis Adams.
These services are held both in New York City, in Washington, D.C., and in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. At night in New York City, 2 beams of light called Tribute in Light can be seen on the night sky. It started as a temporary way to commemorate the victims before the memorial were made, but has continued each year on the anniversary of the attack since 2003. And now let's talk about conspiracy theories. A majority of Americans believe that the government is withholding information about 9/11, and this is only a tiny part of the conspiracy theories surrounding 9/11. Some people believe that the entire thing was a lie. No planes nor terrorists were involved in 9/11. Instead, the entire thing was orchestrated by the government and the CIA. Conspiracy theorists believe that missiles hit the Twin Towers and were camouflaged by holograms as planes. And large amounts of dynamite were placed in the towers beforehand to make sure that they collapsed. And the reason for all of this? To give the president an excuse to go to war in the Middle East and thereby get access to oil. And the arguments to support this theory are that the towers wouldn't have been able to collapse the way that they did, where they pancaked down, without it being a controlled demolition. And that the calls from the passengers on the hijacked plane were technologically impossible at the time because cell phones didn't work and still don't work on airplanes. However, the theory has been disproved by engineers and experts that explain that an extreme destabilization of the tower's construction explains the way that they collapsed. Also, most of the calls from Flight 93 were made with the plane's satellite phones. Only 2 of the calls were made from cell phones, and these happened at a time when the plane was flying very low. However, now in 2019, this theory is being discussed again because of the World Trade Center 7 building that collapsed, even though it wasn't hit by a plane. Conspiracy theorists believe that the building was purposely brought down with dynamite by the government and the CIA to hide their 9/11 plans. The official explanation, which is backed by a report from 2017, is that fire alone made the building collapse. However, a team of researchers from the University of Alaska has concluded in a 4-year study that fire alone did not bring this building down. And now a lot of Americans have requested that this investigation gets reopened. There are many conspiracy theories about 9/11, and if I mentioned them all, this video would be very long. So just to give you an example of a more probable conspiracy theory now that we had a more extreme one before. Some people believe that the American government had nothing to do with the attacks and didn't know about them either. But they used the attacks as an excuse to go to war in Afghanistan and Iraq to get access to oil. The US invaded Afghanistan less than a month after 9/11, and it seems unlikely that such a comprehensive military operation could be planned and executed so quickly. So it seems that the invasion of Afghanistan was underway long before 9/11 happened. This conspiracy theory has not been refuted. That was it for today and for this 2-part series about the 9/11 attacks. If you know about other conspiracy theories or ways the world have changed since 9/11, then share them in the comments below. And remember to like this video if you liked it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.